to Hot Issues. This week we are taking a look at the power sector. What is happening in the power sector? Is there a crisis? And if there's no crisis, what is it? How are we likely to get over the problems in the power sector? What is the time frame for getting over the problems in the power sector? And so on and so forth. Welcome to Hot Issues. Welcome back to Hot Issues, and this week we are looking at the power sector. Why are we experiencing power curtailment? When would it be over? Do we have long-term plans? What are the short-term plans, and what possibly are the medium-term plans? How can we get out of this periodic shortage of electricity and so on? This is what we are looking at this week, and we are very, very privileged to have with us the man who should have the right answers, the Minister of Power, Dr. Kwabena Donkor. Sir, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Senior.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And welcome back to your old ministry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. But, sir, what is the problem? Is there a problem, and what is the problem?
Thank you, Kwesi, and permit you to call you Kwesi, even though you are my senior comrade.
Anyhow,
I want to start by repeating a quote I used this morning at the stakeholders meeting organized by the PURC, called Stakeholder Consultation, and with your permission, I quote, "The recent blackouts and water disruptions may become the norm if urgent measures are not taken to reverse the trend. The utility services is an accident waiting to happen." This was written to His Excellency the President on 27th January 2006 by the chairman of the PURC. And he was absolutely spot on. Today, 8 years later, almost 9 years later, the accident that was waiting to happen has happened. I am using this quote because it addresses the issue of our collective responsibility as a people. It addresses the issue of right diagnosis of our national situation as far as power is concerned, but our inability or unwillingness to implement the measures that which we need to implement in order to solve the problems that we will have rightly diagnosed. What is happening today, you ask? Yesterday during peak, we had to shed 650 megawatts. That is bigger than what Akosombo generates today. Today off peak, Akosombo was generating less than 500, hovering around 500. Off peak today, we've been forced to shed 510 megawatts, again bigger than Akosombo, which is our biggest single generating asset. As we speak, at least 3 of our generating assets are down. Half of Sonon Asogli is down, losing at the minimum 90 megawatts. Tico T2 turbine is down, losing another 100 megawatts. Senate is down, losing another 110 megawatts. And therefore, we find ourselves having to manage a situation far steeper than we had planned. The regular load shedding was based on an off-peak shedding of 250 megawatts and a 350 megawatt shedding during peak. Our peak demand, incidentally, is from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. So when you have such unplanned occurrences, it becomes impossible to stick to a timetable. Fortunately, we were assured yesterday that Sana and Asogli were flying in the parts that's created the problem in today, and by Sunday the plant should be up and running, all things being equal. So that will give us some 100 megawatts. The Senate plan should be up within a week. So that should add to it. So that basically is the challenge.
But how come the 3 key generating plants all develop faults around the same time?
Well, it is not unusual in power systems management. It's not unusual. What makes our situation negatively impactful is the fact that we don't have what we call redundancy, a reserve margin. When you're dealing with equipment, when you're dealing with machinery, the unplanned shutdowns will happen at one time or the other. However, because in most jurisdictions they have adequate redundancy or reserve, you just bring in 1 plant or 2 plants to supplement what you have. Unfortunately for us, because of the high drawdown on Akosombo last year, again arising out of inadequate generation, Akosombo has an installed capacity of 1,020 megawatts. It has a dependable capacity of over 900 megawatts. So if Akosombo was running optimally, we could easily absorb these unplanned outages. Arising out of the low water level, Akosombo is running 4 turbines, not even at full capacity, instead of the installed 6.
Now, in the case of the Azogli plant, you indicated that some part was being flown.
Yeah.
Why can't we have these parts here waiting just in case something went wrong?
Well, it was the steam turbine generator bearing. It is the sort of thing that does not happen every day. Normally with equipment, you will have in stock as spares the parts that you regularly change or use, not a core part that you hardly expect to encounter a problem. We have underinvested in power generation for a period of time. We were extremely comfortable with Akosombo. At the time our first president commissioned Akosombo, our national demand was 100 megawatts. And the first phase of Akosombo was 600 megawatts. Far in excess of what we could even dream of. Since then, yes, we've done a retrofit. But apart from that, very little has been added. We've not added enough thermal generation. But let me also put this in context. If you add the demand of Togo, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone. Ghana's demand is bigger than all these countries combined. So let's put that in context.
Why?
Why? Because we have
more industries than Cote d'Ivoire. What is the reason?
Well, for example, if you take our mines, we have a lot more heavy power intensive industries. Let's put it that way. And we have the second highest electricity penetration in sub-Saharan Africa, other than South Africa, at 76%. In 2006, penetration was 45%. Today is 76%. And I believe it's the democratic right of every Ghanaian to have access to electricity. I believe in that. So the question of why must we extend electricity to rural areas whilst we don't have enough must not arise. It's a question of equity.
Now, Doc, what is the installed generation capacity?
It's about 2,800, 2,850. So let's say about 2,800.
Is it true, the argument, that our installed capacity is bigger than what we consume?
It's bigger than our suppressed demand. Let me put it that way. But there is a difference between installed capacity and dependable capacity. For example, Akosombo has an installed capacity of 1,020 megawatts. Off peak today, it was generating slightly less than 500 megawatts, arising out of the drought, the water situation. But even if we had the right quantum of water in the reservoir, it will generate about 900 and something. That is the dependable capacity. If we take PON, off peak today, PON was running around 79, 80 megawatts instead of 160. Again, because of reasons of water. If you take TAPCO has a problem on one of the units, and therefore we're losing about 60. TAPCO has a signature generating capacity of 330, but there's a problem on one of the units that they should be taken down now. But in the current emergency, they can't take it down. They've ordered the part. The part has to arrive in the country and then look for a loophole, in quotes, in demand, take it down for 3, 4, 5 days. And because of that problem, one of the is operating at half capacity. Because it's operating at half capacity, the steam turbine is also operating at reduced capacity. So, yes, the installed capacity is available, the signature installed capacity, but the dependable capacity is less than 2,300, or about 2,300.
Against consumption of?
As against consumption of. Yesterday, for example, the information I have from our load management team was that the demand was close to 2,200.
Isn't it also true that
and this 2,200, excuse me, does not take account of suppressed demand? For example, if all the port lines of Valco were in operation, at least another 300 megawatts will be added to.
Yeah. But isn't it also true that the VRA, for example, is heavily indebted in terms of fuel supply?
We have had occasional hiccups with fuel supply, particularly in terms of crude oil. But for today, that is not the issue.
But in the past, it contributed.
Occasionally, yes. We've had the vessel lane questions with LC. So the precarious state of the finances has not also been helpful. As we speak, Sonon Asogli owes VRA close to about $130 million for gas that VRA has passed on. But ECG owns Sonon Asogli over $150 million. Senate owes VRA because they have an arrangement where VRA gives them crude, and they are supposed to also give VRA crude when they escape. They've not been able to do that because ECG owes them far more money than the value of crude that they owe GMPC. So there is an element of finance problem, boiling down to poor tariff administration and an inability by two of our three distributing companies to collect what is owed them. At a point, ECG was only collecting about 54% of what is owed. Of course, no business has a profit margin big enough to absorb that. So there is that question. And that is my medium-term task, to restructure our utilities, for them to become customer-focused, but more importantly, more cost-efficient. That responsibility rests on my shoulders, and we've started some work along that path.
I was going to raise the question of inefficiency of the utility companies generally and the power sector companies. What are your observations?
To be fair, technically they've had to operate under conditions that most other utilities will have collapsed. 2 years ago, Akosombo was adjudged the 6th best run hydro facility in the world. So technically, we are on top of the game. However, commercially, our management systems are outdated, to say the least. Let me give you an example. I was on inspection in Ashanti region about 3 weeks ago. I went to inspect a brand new warehouse facility ECG was putting up. They are putting up 2 big warehouses on the same plot of land for Ashanti East and Ashanti West. I thought one of the warehouses should be big enough for the 2 regions, but they are putting up 2. That is not bad enough. There were 37 offices being built for the 2 warehouses. And that is not bad enough. The worst is that there are 2 filling stations being built on the same piece of land, because one has to go to Ashanti West, one has to go to Ashanti East. So I asked them, presently, where do you fuel your vehicles? And both regions fuel from one fueling point. So why must they build 2 fuel stations with 2 sets of attendants, 2 sets of supervisors, etc.? So yes, there is some work commercially to be done to restructure our utilities, for them to be cost effective, for them to be customer focused, and for them to be profitable. Of course, collection. A sale is never complete until money is collected, payment is made. We have a collection problem. I inaugurated a task force about 3-4 weeks ago to address that issue in the short term. In the long term, we must come up with systems, processes and procedures for them to collect.
I've been following the VRA for some time, especially audited reports and so on. And talking about inefficiency, you spoke about 3 years continuous running where VRA had to pay demurrage on imported crude.
Yes.
How is that possible? How can it be efficient and still be paying demurrage 3 years running?
I was careful in answering your question that in terms of technical efficiency, they are absolutely world class. But commercially, running a business, they are not the best. You pay demurrage because the vessel comes in and you are unable to get the vessel to dock or to berth, as we say, because the LCs, the financial arrangements, will not have been in place. And if the LCs are not in place, the seller will want to ensure that he has hold of an LC, and therefore you pay demurrage. It is unacceptable. Part of it arises out of their weak balance sheet.
So how are we going to cure this problem of finance, the financial problems that the power companies have? How are we going to cure the problem? Well, it appears that the ECG owes a lot. The ECG virtually owes everybody. Yes. How are we going to cure the problem?
Well, we will have to take a two-pronged approach. One is to first of all find out whether the utilities are operating at commercial efficiency. I have reason to believe efficiency can seriously be improved commercially. The second problem is whether we are all paying our bills, both the public sector and the private sector. Yes, the government is the single largest debtor to ECG, but the government is not the biggest debtor. The private sector owes ECG more than
some of the mining companies.
Yes,
some of the giant corporations.
More than the government. Unfortunately, too often it's just so easy to say once government pays up. Yes, government must pay. And I'm working with my colleague at the Ministry of Finance, who has very legitimate concerns about the so-called government debt. For example, if you take our public tertiary institutions, I've been to a few of the bungalows of lecturers. They are metered, and the cost of electricity is deducted. They pay. However, the universities don't pay, and they push all that to central government. Ministry of Finance is saying that, look, let's isolate critical academic facilities that the government is prepared to look at. But non-critical facilities, some students today are using air conditioners in their halls, mobile air conditioners. Must the state pay for that luxury? These are the issues we are addressing. Fortunately, my colleague Minister of Education and myself had a conversation even this morning, and we are organizing a forum between the institutions under her ministry that are affected and my ministry and finance to address these issues. The Minister of Finance says as at 31st December 2013, he had instructed that every MDA should pay for its utilities.
As ministry, departments, and
agencies. If you take our hospitals, for example, half of our hospitals, the land space is residential. Must the government, the state, let me say the state, I prefer the state, must the state pay utility bills for a residential component? I believe no. The state must pay for critical clinical facilities. And therefore, we are coming out with a program that will put all the residential and non-core facilities on prepaid meters to reduce the cost to the state.
Hello, welcome to Hot Issues, and we are talking to Dr. Kwabena Donkor, the Minister of Power, and we are discussing Doomsor, the crisis, the solutions, and all. Sir, what is your ministry doing in order to overcome the problem of insufficient supply of power?
Thank you. We are looking at the solution in 3 or 4 perspectives. One is the immediate short term, to get over the load shedding. The second is what are we doing in the medium term to have enough capacity to meet growing demand. And then we have the long term. The fourth is institutional reform to bring in efficiencies. In the short term, we are working on bringing in some emergency generating units. We have almost come to a financial close in terms of the power badges, and therefore we are almost there in terms of getting the badges into Ghana. We are working to bring in another 250 megawatts generation. By the way, the 2 power badges will give us 450 megawatts. We bring in another 250 megawatt generating assets to the Abuaze corridor that will use gas originally meant for T3. T3 has had its own problems, so the evacuation facilities and the gas meant for T3 will be used by this 250 megawatt facility we're bringing in. We are also bringing in 300 megawatts to be fueled by LPG to the Tema corridor. We're working with GE for that emergency.
General Electric.
General
of
Electric.
The United States of
Yes.
America.
The chairman of General Electric was in my office about a week ago, and we are jointly working on that solution as emergency power. That is different from the GE 1000. We are also working with another group from Turkey. They are bringing in 200 megawatts to the Tema corridor, and that plant will also use heavy fuel oil. We have, apart from the challenge of generation, we've also had challenges with fuel, especially the West African gas pipeline. And therefore, I have told my officers, let's plan as if West African gas pipeline does not exist. For example, the gas line is contracted to supply VRA 120 million standard cubic feet a day. When we checked yesterday, they were doing about 51 million standard cubic feet, way below the contracted volumes. And therefore, that occasionally creates fuel challenges for us. The Sanon Asogli plant, for example, can only use gas. So there have been times when the plant has been available but low gas. There are also a few generating assets in the Tema corridor that use gas. Fortunately, a number of them use both gas and LCO, light crude oil. We have had to switch over too frequently from gas to light crude oil. Even though plants are designed to be dual fuel, and for a few of them tri-fuel, they were never meant for such swift changeovers. That affects equipment availability, filters and other things you have to change ever so often. And any plant meant to run on gas with a light crude backup, if you operate on light crude, the efficiency is lower than on gas in terms of output, in terms of plant reliability. So there's the fuel issue. So in the short term, we are planning on bringing in close to 1,000 megawatts of additional generation as emergency power.
But I understand that those emergency power barges, I mean, for them to come, be installed and become operational, we need to find money. Deposits of between $50 and $100 million. Do we have it?
Well, we don't have to deposit physical cash. We have to provide guarantees. For the emergency power barges, it's a $50 million for each barge.
So that's $100 million.
100 for the two. Why they are asking for the guarantee is that they will have to do some work in Ghana. The cables from Fishing Harbour, the first one will be in Tema Fishing Harbour, the cable work and the sea cable work, there's some work to be done here. They will not commit their money to doing that if there's no guarantee that
have we been able to give them the guarantee?
That is what I said, by we should come to financial closure sometime next week, by the end of next week, for the first batch.
Will we come to financial closure?
We are almost there. We are almost there.
You are confident?
Very optimistic.
For both barges?
Yes.
For both barges?
For both barges.
Okay. Now, beyond the emergency power plants and so on, the emergency power plants would not provide a permanent solution.
No, they wouldn't.
Are you working on a permanent solution to the problem?
We are. In the medium term, for example, Southern Asogli Phase 2, the first unit, which will give us 180 megawatts, should become available by December this year. The second unit, that will also give us 180, and these are in combined cycle mode, should also be available by the end of 2016. So in terms of availability, but that is just one. The Pontema plant, all things being equal, should become available subject to fuel availability at the end of April or sometime May this year. 220 megawatts owned by VRA. The TICO combined cycle should also become available by the end of April. They've given us March, but I'm buying insurance by saying the end of April. That will add an extra 110 megawatts. There is the Jacobson IPP facility that was ratified by Parliament around November, December last year. There's also the Amandi. The two plants should be giving us close to another 700. They are IPPs. But they should be available in 3-4 years.
Yes, sir. But all of these are thermal generation plants.
They are.
What about the mini hydro projects?
Yes, I will come to that. Remember, there's also the GE 1000, yes, on which we're working on. That is for the medium term. In the long term, we are looking at other fuel forms. We have exhausted all our major hydro potential today. We do not have enough gas. Even, with today's information, we will not have enough gas beyond the next 10-15 years. And therefore, we should be planning for that. So we are looking at coal fuel generation. Fortunately, because we will be coming on very late on the coal game, we will be able to leapfrog the dirty coal. Technology is available today, clean coal technology, coal to gas, various new technologies. Basically, they are technologies that eliminate the levels of pollution that we've all spoken against in the past. Mm-hmm. And coal is the most available fuel source in the world. 41% of global electricity generation today is coal-based.
There has been a lot of advocacy around things like wind energy solar energy, and so on.
Are
they featuring in your plans?
Yes, I'm a believer in renewables. Indeed, Sunday, Ghanaian professor. On Friday, I will be at the Adan area to observe some equipment that a Ghanaian professor has developed, and that is coming in for a form of wave or tidal energy. And my prayer is that the pilot becomes successful. There is also...
There's been one designed by, Kenneth Jackson?
Well, I haven't seen
Kenneth Jackson, who used to be the Minister for Works and Housing under Champon.
Well, I haven't seen that yet, but I am aware of this, and I'm going there on Friday. I believe in solar, and the ministry is working out policies. In fact, I've asked that Greda be invited for a discussion. I want to see all new estates coming up incorporating solar, at least for basic lighting and heating.
But that would involve perhaps changing the building code.
Yes, but in 2008, I took part in the drafting of a certain document that called for the changing of the building code. But even for rooftop solar, you don't really need that. I know a couple of people, and in my own private house, I'm working on getting solar there. It can be done, and especially by estate developers. People have previously spoken about the cost, but senior, if somebody can afford a $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 house, an additional $2,000 for solar should not be a disincentive.
It's cheaper than a generator.
Precisely. My challenge in the interim has been with grid connected solar. A study done indicates that the Ghanaian grid currently can only accommodate 250 megawatts of renewable energy, and so we should be careful, because our peak demand is from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. when the sun is not available. For big grid connected solar, you are going to need an equivalent amount of conventional power to back it when it's not available into the grid. Yes, there is storage technology, but to store 50, 100, 150 megawatts of solar is extremely expensive, and therefore the economics don't work out presently. Going forward, as technology improves and the cost of storage comes down, then grid connected solar, the 50 megawatts, the 40 megawatts, the 100 megawatts, the 150. In fact, some people are even claiming they want to do 300 megawatts solar in Ghana. Presently, I will not be encouraging that type of solar. The type of solar I want to see is solar for schools, especially our rural schools. For example, if all JHS buildings in our rural communities had solar panels on them, the school could become the center of the community again. Adult literacy classes, they could all be held in the school. Our chips compound, medication can be preserved with solar powered fridges, among other things. So we're encouraging that. Wind, our wind speeds are relatively low. They are average in this country, but the eastern corridor,
I understand that around Winneba.
yes, the eastern corridor in particular has some opportunities, and VRA, for example, is working to erect some masts to generate power using wind. But the issue is currently solar will not give us that huge deficit that we have. That does not mean we must not encourage it. It must be an efficient energy mix. That is what we're looking at.
Well, welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are in conversation with the Minister of Power, Dr. Kwabena Donkor. We've spoken about the nature of the problem. We've tried to look at some of the solutions to the problem, and now we are looking at the timelines. Sir, what are the timelines? When will Doomso be over?
Well, I expect load shedding to be over latest by the end of the year.
That's a long time.
Well, when you take 15, 20 years to create a problem, you can't resolve it in months. By the end of the year, load shedding in all its forms will have been over. However, that does not mean we will not begin to see a decrease before the end of the year. We would.
So what are we likely to see, say, by the end of January or by the end of February, tapering into April and so on? What are the timelines?
Well, I hate to give out timelines because we're talking about engineering solutions for some of them. But what I can say is that we expect that within the next 3 weeks, some additional generation will come on. The Son and Sogle should come on. The Senate plant should be back. At least those two. And we expect again that in 4 weeks, at least 1 unit of TICO should be back. We expect that by April, the second unit and half of the combined cycle should be back. At least by the end of April, we expect that TICO should have a dependable capacity of about 300 out of the installed capacity of 330. So the situation will ameliorate.
That is if it rains.
Well, we are managing the reservoir in such a way that the water will take us somewhere into July.
Okay.
And that is why we are running 4 units now. And even the 4 units, they are not being run at maximum capacity to preserve water. So if we have these, even TICO and Senate back on in about 2 weeks, probably earlier, but in about 2 weeks from now, that will give us close to 200 available generation. So it will reduce the intensity of the load shedding. Once TICO comes on board, it will further reduce the intensity. And I expect that from April, between April, July, June, July, August, some of the emergency power units will have arrived, and it will further reduce the intensity. And that is why I say by the end of the year, worst case scenario, load management should be over.
This question may be unfair to you, but if you think it's unfair, ignore it. The establishment of the Ministry of Power, was it necessary? How would that contribute to resolving the problem?
Well, I believe taking cognizance of our present situation, creating a ministry to focus exclusively makes sense, at least in the short to medium term. Whether in the long term that configuration should still exist or not is another matter. In any case, there have been various configurations of ministries in this country. But more importantly, power is too critical to our national survival. Ghanaian industry in particular must be competitive. And we cannot be competitive if we do not have stable, cheap base load power. We sit on 2 billion tons of iron ore in this country. But with big deposits and Shaney in the northern region. Can we imagine what a world-class steel mill in Shaney or Yendi, anywhere in the northern region, what it can do to the economic transformation of that part of the country? We have 700-800 million tons of bauxite at Chebi and Yinahi. We're working on an alumina refinery. I have responsibility for that as well, because I have responsibility for Balco. What that can do to our economy. If we got Valco running, especially now that Valco is 100% Ghanaian, and downstream of Valco, the industries, the factories downstream of Valco will create hundreds and thousands of jobs for Ghanaian youth. For me, Ghana must return to a manufacturing environment. That is where jobs will be created for our people. We cannot do any of that without reliable, cheap base load power. The foresight of our first president points to the need for us to have cheap base load power, reliable for industrialization. The government of which I'm a part, His Excellency the President, has set up an agenda of transformation, a transformational agenda based on turning raw materials into finished products. We cannot begin to do this without stable, reliable power
and cheap
power. If we take it from that perspective, I believe it's a step in the right direction.
Now, sir, finally, are you privatizing or intending to privatize the electricity company of Ghana?
I've been asked this question so many times in the past couple of days. No, we are not privatizing ECG. We will be restructuring ECG. For example,
what's the difference? Restructuring, privatizing?
There are different options.
Okay.
Unfortunately, every restructuring has been dubbed privatization in the Ghanaian lexicon. It is not. We are not. Look, I gave you an example of some managerial lack of privatization in ECG. ECG presently has 13 directors reporting to one managing director. Is that the sort of thing you want to retain in 21st century management? Mind you, I am a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute of UK. No organization will run that way today. So if our utilities are going to survive, recognizing that the only constant in today's management is change. Organizations have to be growing organizations. Organizations have to be learning organizations. Organizations must rebirth themselves periodically, re-engineer their business processes. If this is to take place, the utilities have to be restructured. Must we have, for example, an authority to run Bui separate from Akosombo and Pon? Must we continue to combine thermal generation with hydro-based generation? These are issues that call for restructuring of organizations.
Also, thank you very much for having us.
The pleasure is mine.
And we've been listening to Dr. Kwabena Donkor, the Minister of Power, who actually accepted us in his office for this interview. And we are very grateful to Dr. Kwabena Donkor.